Daly. I have a lot more hair than he does. Uh, Mike Daly is out celebrating his anniversary, as we stated earlier, so I get to fill in for him today. And it's great to see all you guys again, and it's great to be up here, and I love that this church has been willing to give me the practice and give me the opportunities to speak to you guys and practice my preaching. And, I'm sorry that you guys get to be the ones I get to practice on, but thank you guys for being the ones I get to practice on. So, but good morning, everyone. It's great to see you guys online, too. I know you guys are out there. So, and today I want to talk about discipleship. And obviously, we talk about discipleship in a lot of ways, but I'm going to talk about it in the idea of mentoring. So, in the Great Commission, Jesus states, make disciples. He doesn't say make converts, he says make disciples. And a disciple is a student. A student, and he gives us the invitation to mentor and train underneath him, to be a disciple of him, just as much as we get to be disciples to others. And we get to become Jesus' apprentice, his student, his learner of we get to learn how to live from him, and we're to be disciples and make more disciples. And to mentor others is to mentor another Christian other than ourselves, to be a better Christian than ourselves. Jesus speaks about us being disciples of him all the time, and sometimes I feel like we need to talk about it in the idea of mentors a little bit more often, just as much as we are disciples. But I'm going to start off with this story. There's a man, he's sitting at the breakfast table, and he's reading the paper, or reading the news, or watching the news, or whatever, and on the paper, on the news, there's this ad, and it says, 1995, cruise. Pay $19.95 and you get to go on a cruise. And he goes, there's no way that's true. That's got to be a scam. So he passes it off, and he forgets about it for a little while, and then later on he's talking to one of his buddies, and he's trying to ask him, hey, what do you think about this cruise thing? What do you think we should do? What do you think? Do you think it's fake? Do you think it's a scam? It looks real enough. And his buddy is very like, I don't know. He really just doesn't say anything. So he goes, okay, whatever. So he gets back home, he picks up the newspaper again, and he looks at it, and he goes, there's a toll-free number, I might as well call it. So he gives a call to the toll-free number for the 1995 cruise. And he takes the call, and sure enough, there's a real person on the other side. And they go, yep, we have a travel agency. They want you, if you just come on into the travel agency, give us the money, we'll give you this free cruise. Or this 1995 cruise. And he goes, okay, well, why not? So the next day he gets up, he drives over to the travel agency. Sure enough, there's a real building, a real travel agency there. And he walks in, he goes, I'd like to take you up on your 1995 cruise. And the lady at the desk goes, why, of course. Hand over the money and we'll get you set up for the cruise. Everything will be paid for. You'll have a wonderful time. It's a day and a half, 2-day cruise. It's not a super long one, but we'll get you set up. And he goes, okay, cool. So he takes $19.95 out of his pocket, puts it down on the table. She takes the money, puts it in the register, pulls out a bat, knocks him on the head, knocks him out. He then wakes up with a massive headache, tied to a log with a sail, going down a river. What a cruise! But as he's sailing down the river in this log, he finds himself to kind of enjoy himself. He's like, well, it is calm. The log isn't rolling, which is a good thing. It's calm. The breeze is nice. The water's warm. It's not cold. He kind of enjoys himself. Besides the massive headache he's got, he kind of finds himself enjoying himself a little bit. And after a while, he sees another log floating down the river. And he goes, oh, there must have been another person who fell for this scam. So he goes, okay, well, at least I'm not the only one that's this dumb. And as the logs are coming closer to closer, he's like, oh, sweet, I'll be able to talk to him a little bit. And as the other log pulls up, he notices it's his friend from before. And he goes, hey, I didn't know you were going on this. Do you know if they have any refreshments on this cruise? And his friend goes, I don't know. They didn't have any last year. As funny as this illustration can be, I mean, how often do we see this in our own lives, where we fall for the same scam 1995 cruise year after year, right? We're beginning the new year. We're getting ready to move into the new us, right? New Year's resolutions. We get to do the new things. We get to be a new person, right? We get to try to do something throughout the year. Do we fall for that same 1995 cruise every year? How many times do you see a Christian who stays the same year after year and keeps paying for the 1995 cruise? Our main verse today is Proverbs 27:17, and it says, "Iron sharpens iron, and as one man sharpens another." How many times do we go through our everyday life realizing we could stop the other man who went down the river on the 1995 cruise? And not only let them know that the cruise was a scam and it's not what they think it is, but also to help stop ourselves from doing it again and again and again. To help make sure that they don't fall in the same trap as we did, but also to help them make sure they don't fall in the same trap that we still do. I'm going to ask a question, and we'll get to more of it later. And that question is sand or rock? And it's very possible to hear the teachings of Jesus, but not put them into practice. When we only hear and don't obey Jesus' teachings, we find ourselves cycling through bad decisions and experiencing a spiritual stagnancy, so to speak. We find churches producing church attenders, but not necessarily church disciples. In the parables of the two foundations, Jesus explains the difference between just hearing his teachings and building our lives on them. Matthew 7:24 through 27, the only verse on the page is 24, but I'm going to read through 27. 24 says, "Therefore everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house. Yet it did not fall, because it was on the foundation of rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash." The man who built his house on rock and the man who built his house on sand both heard the words of God. They both built their house on that foundation. But that's certainly not the point of the parable. Both of the men get pounded by life. They have pouring rain, they have wind, they have storms, they have hurricane winds, they have whatever goes on. They have the water, they have the flooding, they have all these issues, just as life goes for everybody. But in the end, only one of the houses is standing. It's only one who listened and obeyed and built the foundation on God. In the parallel parable in Luke 6, 46 and 49, it's not more about location, sand or rock, but as much as whether someone digs down deep enough to hit the rock foundation or not. My dad, he worked in construction, and he could tell you, you have to dig pretty deep down to have a solid foundation. Especially where I used to live in the desert. There's a lot of sand. But you couldn't dig down too deep, otherwise you'd break water. That was always an issue down there. But both of these guys dig. It just depends on how deep they will dig. And both are interested in Jesus, both listen to Jesus, both hear the word, read the Bible, but only one of them digs deep enough to hit rock in his foundation. Jesus is placing an equal sign to life that doesn't get destroyed and following his teachings, a stable life and his teachings. And that's a lot of authority he claims, which is rightly so. When we hear Jesus' teachings, we feel similarly to the crowds after hearing. We should feel similarly to the crowds hearing after the Sermon on the Mount. On the Sermon on the Mount in 7:28 and 29, the crowds were amazed at his teaching because he was taught as one who had authority. If you know, for the past several months, we've been talking a lot about the Sermon on the Mount. And we should feel amazed at the teachings of Jesus. We should feel amazed at his authoritativeness. The crowds would have heard Jesus remark, "Who does he think he is?" He thinks he's the Son of God. And he knows who he is. And if we Christians know who we are and know who he is, then we should believe in him and follow the teachings that he asks. So, I'm going to ask you guys again, sand or rock? A life that crumbles or a life that stands? A church that produces church attenders or a church that produces serious disciples of Jesus? And the world at the moment can seem to be crumbling around us all the time. The storms and the wind can be beating at us day after day, month after month, year after year. And when it is like this, it's when we need to build our foundation on Jesus. And we seriously need to get back in the idea of making disciples for Jesus. Making disciples to make disciples for Jesus. To mentor those to bring into Christ. The world is split and conflicted at the moment because it doesn't know which path to take. And it's ripe for us to mentor the next level of disciples. I'm going to ask 3 questions today to kind of help us figure out the teachings and the foundation of how we disciple people. And we're going to have all 3 questions eventually on the slides here. But the first one is, what is the world looking for? What is the world looking for? And in a book called Mirage by Daniel McCoy, he tells the following story. When I was in junior high, I was told to write a descriptive essay with lots of colorful descriptions. I giggled wickedly as I planned the story. It would read like a happy little children's story, but end with a dark twist. I decided to write about Tommy and Billy jumping into the pile of autumn leaves. Yay, hooray! Lucky, their dog, not wanting to be left out of the reverie, bounded through the doggy door and into the fun, not noticing the snake that had slithered into the pile. Bark, Lucky yelped. Dad ran out, bent down to the dog, and said, I'm sorry, boys. The dog is dead. The end. What is the world looking for? It's not looking for a pathetic story like that one. That's for sure. We end up getting scammed and cut off by life at every turn, and we try to buy things that'll make us happy. We try to buy these things that make us happy, but the stuff rots, right? We do a lot of fun things that we think will make us happy. The saying is, money can't buy happiness, and the opposite saying is, I've never seen a sad person on a jet ski. But you can't always be on the jet ski, right? There's always lasting happiness around the next corner, the next corner, the next thing I get to buy. We might choose and chase after money and health and beauty, but as someone wise, very depressingly said, we end up as expensive worm food. We trust in political leaders or people of standing, and they disappoint us every day also. And we love people, but they lie and betray, and they die. We can construct a great civilization like Rome or Greek back in the ages, but those have long since crumbled, and ours will also. Everything seems to end with the dog dead. So what is the world looking for? It's looking for anything, even one thing it can truly trust. And they need to get it from somewhere. They need to get it from someone they can trust. A mentor. Question number 2 is, what does the world get instead? John Stott, a Bible scholar who has passed since now, wrote a commentary called Sermon on the Mount, in which he talked about what the world is looking for and what the world gets instead. He wrote of the hunger of our culture for something real, true peace, true love, and hope, and that our culture craves these things. And our answer for the world is simple. Go to church. You'll find what you need there. There's people there that can help you. Here's a Bible. There's this great guy named Jesus. Go to church. You'll figure it out. But when they go to the church, what actually happened? What did they get instead? And here's what John Stott says. He says, the first place to which they should be able to turn is the one place which they normally ignore, namely the church. For too often, what they have seen in the church is not a new society which embodies their ideals of peace, hope, and love, but another version of the old society which they have renounced. Not life, but death. Stott is saying people turn to the church to find what they're missing, what they're longing for, what they're trying to get, and it just turns out to be more of the same disappointment. Stott continues, no comment could be more hurtful to any Christian than the words, but you are no different from anybody else. So what does the world get instead from us? What the world often gets instead from us is illustrated by the way people like to play the piano. Reading music is very difficult. There are rocket scientists who say at least it's not music theory, right? But to try to learn music, we do things like scales, like every good boy does fine, or Eddie ate dynamite, goodbye Eddie, to try to help learn the scales, right? We try to learn all the letters, every good boy does fine, right? E, G, B, etc. We try to learn those scales to try to learn how to play those things. And when we play those, end result is we get to learn the notes, and we can look at something, and the end result is that we don't have to count up, right? We don't have to go, every good boy, okay, so that's B every single time, right? We can just go E, G, B, and we know which one's the B. We know which one is the piano. We know which one is on the guitar, etc. in music. And eventually it should come naturally. But some people are able to skip the whole reading the music part and have learned how to play by ear. I have no idea how to do that, but it does exist. And the people can come a little more naturally, but they skip the more laborious, fruitful pathway of actually learning how to read music. Some people can skip the hard work of learning how to read music and play pretty good, but they're going to be very limited on what they can actually play. Whereas if you read music, you can go, oh, that's the notes, and play whatever song it is. So when it comes to us being Christians, we tend to do what comes naturally by ear. There's plenty of the habits in the Bible for us to practice if we really want to learn the real thing, and it's got plenty of every good boy does fine types of scales. But how often do we try to play by ear and not really practice the notes we're trying to play? There's lots of new habits and lots of old habits to unlearn in the Bible, and I've got a couple examples about how to live out real things. In Romans 12:17, it talks about how we can learn forgiveness. It says, do not repay anyone evil for evil. Colossians 3:17 talks to us about how to learn thankfulness, giving thanks to God the Father. Ephesians 4:25 talks about honesty, and therefore each of you must put off falsehood and speak truthfully to your neighbor, for we are all members of the body. These aren't easy, and it takes time to practice these, just as it does to take time to learn the piano. But it takes rethinking, relearning, and retraining. Breaking old habits and getting new ones is always, always difficult. That's the kind of church that would tell the world what we have what they're looking for, right? A church that forgives one another, a church that blesses those who persecute us, a church who loves even when we don't like that person or even when it's really, really, really hard, right? A church that is kind to everybody without exception. These sorts of things wouldn't necessarily make the culture like us, but if we really trained those areas, we'd become a place of healing and restoration, a home for prodigals, a hospital for the hurting and the sick, a place where truth is lived out. The culture would at least get the hunch that what they're missing, we have. Instead, what the world often sees instead is a church that skips training to become like Jesus. We try to play by ear and jumps into whatever comes naturally. The church regularly expects people to be living a life like Jesus. Doing what comes naturally might sound good to us, but compared to what it could be, it's extraordinarily limited. Practicing on the piano makes a much better sound when someone who's been practicing for a while than someone who's trying to play it for the first time, no matter how talented they might be. But when someone is taught the piano from someone who already knows how to play the piano, the growth is much greater, much more exponential. To learn from a woodworker how to woodwork, you can learn and experience things that you could not if you were just figuring it out on your own. Question number 3 is, what do we need to do about it? So reviewing, what is the world looking for? It's looking for something, anything they can truly trust. What does the world get instead? Instead, of really training to learn the way of Jesus, Christians do whatever comes naturally to it, as long as it sounds all right. So what do we need to do about it? We've got to learn to live like Jesus and share it. Yet, even though many of us have heard sermon after sermon telling us how to live like Jesus, it's no guarantee that we'll actually end up living like Jesus. Many of us know the two greatest commandments, the Beatitudes, which we recently reviewed, and etc. for a long time. We talk about these things, we preach these things, we learn these things all the time. But knowing these truths doesn't translate into living like Jesus. Our problem might have everything to do with who we think the smartest person in the world is. Who are the smartest, most intelligent people you've ever heard of? Who comes to mind? There's a blank in your notes if you want to fill it out with someone. Einstein, Aristotle, Socrates, Isaac Newton, Edison, Stephen Hawking. How many of you put Jesus? We think Jesus is really good and he's got these amazing morals and compassion and love, but we don't typically see him as being a genius. We don't typically see him as being the smartest person in the world. But Jesus is definitely in that category. So we end up reading what Jesus said about how we live, how we get to live, and we say to ourselves, nice thoughts, impressive morals, but I don't think that's really what we're supposed to do. And the philosopher Dallas Willard, in his book, The Sermon on the Mount, about the Sermon on the Mount called The Divine Conspiracy, he writes, "And can we seriously imagine that Jesus could be Lord if he were not smart? If he were divine, would he be dumb or uninformed? Once you stop to think about it, he could be what we take him to be in all other respects, and not to be the best informed and most intelligent person of all, the smartest person who ever lived." Often we hear Jesus' teachings of how to live, and we really do think to ourselves that we know better how to live our lives. That's not our problem. But we've got to really start truly making Jesus' life and teachings the foundation of how we live and how we disciple. Jesus does know better. I'm going to read through a lot of verses here, a lot of Sermon on the Mount type verses. Only a couple of them are on the slides here, but we're just going to go through them. So they're all in Matthew if you guys want to follow along. They're going to go from Matthew 5:27 to Matthew 7. Matthew 5:27 to 28 says, Jesus knows better than we do just how devastating adultery is. And he states, in the Bible it states, anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Jesus knows better than we do how bad favoritism can be. In Matthew 5:43 and 44, it says, you have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. He knows how easy it is for religious people to get prideful. And in 6:1, he says, be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. He knows a lot better than us on how stuff can help us feel empty. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy, where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven. In 6:15, he talks about how close-hearted an unforgiving heart is, and how the love of God can be kept out. If you do not forgive others their sins, your Father will not forgive your sins. Jesus knows better just how ridiculous it is to worry about things. And in Matthew 6:27, he says, can any of you by worrying add a single hour to your life? In 33, he states, seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all those things will be given you as well, on about how complete our lives could be if we just focused on him. In chapter 7, 1 and 2, it says, do not judge or you too will be judged. For the same way you judge others, you will be judged. He knows how destructive it is to be judgmental to others. And the last one, 7:13, he knows how easy it is to walk our path of destruction. He says, even though enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. Jesus knows a lot better than we do. And it's just a sampling of the treasures and warnings he's offered to us. But we have the treasures in the teachings of Jesus. Jesus asked us to make disciples. In Proverbs, to reread our verse today, it is iron sharpens iron, and one man sharpens another. He said to teach the disciples everything he said. A disciple is that student, that invitation to train underneath him and to live a life like Jesus. To become Jesus' apprentice, his student, to have him as our mentor. And we get to use his life and his teachings as our curriculum. This curriculum is used to share the gospel with others. And if you're an experienced Christian and have the desire to be like Jesus, to build on the rock, to dig down into your roots, to know where you stand, then I implore you to disciple to others. Become a mentor for others. Not a know-it-all, not the one who takes the 1995 scam cruise year after year, but the one who can mentor someone new. Find someone you can mentor. There is a split in the world right now. There are more and more generations coming up who don't know what to do. There are many who have fallen into the lies and the hate of the world, and there are many who don't know which side to pick. There are people who need something they can trust, need someone they can trust. They're rebelling against the world, and they need someone to ground them, to be an aid to their foundation for their faith. And this church is ripe to give the fruits of mentorship, to give the Christian experience. There are many of you who have been Christians for a long time. 10, 20, 30, 40, or more years. Use all of that experience. Use all of the decades of experience and trust that you have in the Lord to mentor your faith. To mentor the next generation, the ones that are wandering lost throughout the world, who don't know what to do. The ones that you can disciple to and reach out to. The ones who wander the world going, this isn't right, but I don't know what is. Giving them something they can trust, something they can hold on to, the foundation. But they need someone to help them. The world is looking for a truth. The world is looking for the truth. And we have it in our very hands, if not also in our minds. We're all disciples of Christ, and we are called to make more disciples. We are called to mentor those in the faith, and don't just hand them a Bible and say, go to church, it'll work out. But instead to go up to them and go, let me guide you. Let me show you the way to Christ. Let me show you the practices. Let me show you what it means to be a Christian, and let me show you why it's the best thing I have ever done. We are all the disciples of Christ, and we all can mentor those around us. To show those that don't know the Bible what it is and what it means, and the truth that it is. We all can trust Jesus for our afterlife. We can all put our foundation in him for eternal life. And it's time to trust him for this life too. He knows best how to live our lives, and he knows that what this world desperately needs. It needs disciples. It needs mentors. It needs faith. This world needs people of Christ to help them back to the truth, back to the light. So as I end today, I want to ask you one more time. Sand or rock?